Our next topic is ABO blood typing. You already looked at this in lab, and so you know that there are 4 types in ABO blood group. There's type A, B, AB, and O. And this refers to the antigen that's found on the surface of the red blood cell. So a person with type A blood has an antigen that's been called the type A antigen. It's a sugar, it's a carbohydrate. A person with type B blood has a different antigen on the surface of their red blood cells. It's the B antigen. A person with AB blood has both kinds of antigens on the surface of their red blood cells, and so they'll have the type A and the type B dispersed across the surface. And a person with type O blood will have neither A nor B antigens on the surface of the red blood cell. And so that's what's found on the surface of the red blood cell, but then we also have to talk about what's found in the blood. So a person with type A blood will have anti-B antibodies circulating in the blood as a dissolved protein. It's an antibody. It's a protein that brings about immune responses. A person with type B blood will have anti-A antibodies, and so it's really easy for you to see in this pattern that whatever antigen a person has, they'll have the opposite antibody. A person with type AB blood will have neither anti-A nor anti-B antibodies, and a person with type O blood will have both anti-A and anti-B antibodies. And what's important about this is that the type of antibody that's present will tell you about what kind of blood that person can receive, because basically they can't have anything with a B antigen if we're talking about someone with type A blood. A person with type A blood cannot receive type B blood because their antibodies would recognize the antigens on the surface of a red blood cell. They also cannot receive type AB blood for that same reason, but type O blood is no problem because there are no antigens for their anti-B antibodies to recognize. And so you can kind of think about the pattern. So this person can receive type A blood, which is the same as their blood type, but they can also receive type O. A person with type AB blood, because they don't have anti-A or anti-B antibodies, they can receive any type of blood. However, a person with type O blood, because they have anti-A and anti-B antibodies, they can only receive type O blood. And so this is important for transfusions. If a person has had a significant amount of blood loss and they need a replacement of some of that blood, of course we want to make sure that they get the appropriate blood type donated. In what happens in the case of an incompatible transfusion, a person receives a blood type that is incompatible with their antibodies. So if we give a person with type A blood, if we give them B blood, that B blood is going to be recognized by the anti-B antibody. The patient's antibodies will bind to the donated cells. And that leads to agglutination, and agglutination is where you get this massive clump of antibody and red blood cell with the antigen and antibody and antigen and antibody, and it's a huge clump. And I want you to be very clear that agglutination is different from a blood clot. They sound kind of similar. It's just a big clump of blood stuff and cells, but blood clotting refers to a very specific type of clump, which includes platelets and fibrin protein, whereas agglutination is a specific cluster or clump of donor red blood cells and recipient or patient antibodies. Agglutination is going to lead to a number of problems. One problem is that these clumps are very attractive to macrophages. And so the donated red blood cells will be phagocytized, and that's going to result in hemolysis, lysis of the donated red blood cells. That results in turn in the release of massive amounts of hemoglobin. That can lead to the blockage of the kidney, which will then lead to kidney failure, and that leads to massive systemic toxicity and multiple organ failure, which is going to almost always lead to death. Even without the kidney failure and the massive organ failure, this lysis will result in systemic inflammation, which is obviously going to make a person feel incredibly bad. One of the signs of this is that they'll have a pain in their back. They're going to feel incredibly sick, and there's also going to be a deterioration of that hemoglobin that's been leaked everywhere into bilirubin. They'll turn kind of a yellowy green color. They can be incredibly sick. Sometimes people have a fairly mild reaction, sometimes they have a very severe reaction, and it can be deadly. And it's the result of the antibodies that their immune system produces interacting with antigens that shouldn't be in their body. So it's important to pay attention to the type of blood that's given to a patient. It's one of the many reasons why I emphasize attention to detail.